California microbiologist Dr. Kary Mullis was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1993 for his development of one of the most widely used current techniques in molecular biology today, the PCR, or polymerase chain reaction. This revolutionary technique allows scientists to take a sample containing a very minute amount of DNA and replicate that DNA sequence until there are many copies. One of the first applications of PCR was to analyze human tissue for the presence of HIV.
The people that are AIDS researchers now are getting neurotic if you ask them any questions. There was a time when I first started asking questions, all I wanted was, where are the papers? Just tell me the papers that you read that convinced you that HIV was the cause of AIDS, because I need to reference those papers in some of those. I was working on a test for HIV with PCR, and I needed to write a little report to the NIH and say, here's the progress we've made. And the first line of it was, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. And I thought that was true. This is before I got involved. And I said, what's the reference for that quote? And I looked for it for about 2 or 3 years, and I never could find it. And by the end of 2 years, I'd ask everybody at every meeting that I'd gone to that talked about AIDS, I'd ask, I'd look through every computer database. There is no reference. There is nobody who should get credit for that statement. Now, that's a pretty weird situation in science, where getting credit for a discovery is the most important thing in your life as a scientist. At some point, we needed to re-up our grant from the NIH to work on that, and I had to write it. And so the first line of that was, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. And I wrote that, and then I said, well, I need a paper, some kind of scientific paper, to reference that statement, because when you make a statement like that, that's like a fact. You need to say, here's how come I know that. I said, well, what's that? I don't know. Let me think about, what is that paper? Who do I go to for that? And I looked around. I asked a couple of virologists at that company, and they said, no, you don't have to reference. I said, I have to reference that because I don't know where that came from. How do I know that? And it turned out that nobody knew it. There wasn't a scientific reference, like a paper that somebody had submitted with like experimental data in it and like logical discussion, and said, here's how come we know that HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. There was nothing out there like that. Nothing. Mm-hmm. By the time I met Luc Montagnier, I had met a lot of AIDS researchers at meetings, and I had always gone up to them. If they talked like they knew about HIV and AIDS, I always went up to them afterwards and I said, where can I find a scientific reference that I can use for my, remember I said I had a sentence there, it said HIV is the probable cause of AIDS, and I needed to have that backed up by something. And so I asked all these people one after the other, and none of them had it. None of them. And I was getting really freaked about that. That's when I first started saying, they don't know. Nobody really knows. This whole thing is a big sham. It's ridiculous. And they had Montagnier come there and give a talk, and after that they had a little wine and cheese thing, and I went over to Montagnier afterwards and I said, I can't find a reference to go with the statement, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. I'm sure you can help me. He knew that he probably should be able to help me, and he said, well, why don't you quote this new work, and by new he meant like something that came out this year, right? This new work about a virus that can kill monkeys. And I had read that and I said, it was like supposedly going to be a model system for studying AIDS that somebody had figured out. There was nothing like AIDS there. It was just totally ridiculous. None of the symptoms were the same. And I said, well, I read that paper and I didn't see any connection between that and AIDS, and I don't think that would be I wouldn't want to use that as a reference. I didn't get any more out of him. He walked away after that. And the people standing around, by the way, who were his colleagues there, looked at him like they were thinking he should come up with a better answer than that. But he couldn't, and he just turned around and walked away. I really thought he'd have an answer. I really did. I mean, that was my last, I was right at the edge of my faith in the system, but I thought Montagnier will know why he thinks HIV causes it, and he'll tell me. He'll say, because of this study, but he didn't have that. None of those guys have that, and that's why they're so weird, That's why they don't want dissent. They don't want people like me walking up and asking them those kind of questions, and they're willing to go to great lengths to prevent that. They're out on a limb. I wouldn't want to be there with them. It's silly to hear people saying, you don't believe that HIV causes AIDS? You don't believe that? It's become a very emotional kind of thing, because people actually, they get personally committed to what really is a body of evidence that can be analyzed, by lots of people, but nobody can write a review of it that says HIV causes AIDS because of this. If a postdoc were to write a review of their literature that showed without much doubt that HIV was the cause of AIDS, that guy would be famous. Now there's 100,000 guys out there who had the opportunity. Just 10 years has passed. We've been waiting for this star postdoctoral fella to distinguish himself forever and get a lifelong grant from Tony Fauci, but he hasn't shown up. No one has bothered to write a definitive review. Any journal would take it. That right there proves that HIV does not cause AIDS. Just because Bob Gallo gets up, takes his sunglasses off and says, gentlemen, you discovered the cause of AIDS. That's all we have. New York Times article, CDC report, that's all we have. That's not enough. That's not enough that is not sufficient to publish even a meager little scientific paper somewhere. That's certainly not enough to treat at the cost of billions of dollars a year, and at the cost of a lot of lives and anguish, and just destroyed, lives have just been totally ruined by this thing on the basis of some flimsy little statement made by a guy who's known to be a crook in lots of other ways. He lied about a whole lot of other stuff. Why we trust him there? If he was a witness in a courtroom, we wouldn't trust his testimony. We've caught him in too many lies. So you don't trust him anymore. We have these little, there are theories all over the place, but no real competent immunologist would tell you that CD4 levels was a surrogate marker for anything until we know more about it. But that's what they're using. That's what the FDA is saying, yeah. You don't have to show that it helps them. These protease inhibitors, the same thing. You don't have to show that it helps the patient. You don't have to show a single life saved. All you have to do is show some little clinical indicator has changed in a way that somebody is hoping is going to make you better. That cell biology is a bunch of magic half the time. And those culture, the people that say they can do quantitative estimations of HIV from cultures are just, they're fooling themselves. The number of cases reported went up epidemically, exponentially, because the number of tests that was done went up exponentially. How many doctors knew about HIV in 1983? 2. How many knew about it in 1985? Say 500. How many knew about it in 1986? 40,000. So that's where the curve came from. How much money did we make off of HIV this year? And they could have plotted that, and it would have looked the same. And they could have said it's an epidemic because we're making more and more money off of it every year. If it's just caused by needles, or it's just caused by homosexual activities, you're not going to really get a long, sustained public outcry against it, and nobody's going to want to spend $6 billion a year. So the CDC had to say, we can't say that. We got to say it's got to be heterosexually transmitted. There's no proof that it's transmitted at all at that point. So why not just say, well, it's heterosexually transmitted too? Because that made it a plague, and the CDC needed one. The CDC hadn't had a good plague since polio. Their funding was probably going to be cut back if they didn't come up with one. The guy that was the head of the CDC, in fact, wrote memos that have been obtained, where he describes this as hot stuff. Those guys have got an agenda, which is not what we would like them to have, being that we pay for them to take care of our health in some way. The scientists are, like you say, they are considered the final arbiters of what's good for the planet or what's bad for the planet. And they hadn't got the slightest idea. Instead of wearing white robes, they wear white lab coats, Instead of bringing you the word of God, they bring you the word of the EPA or whatever. And they don't have to understand what it is that they're making you do, in fact. When beliefs get tangled up with facts, matters of fact become matters of religious kind of significance, where if somebody gets mad at you for asking him a question in a scientific meeting, or says, we're never going to have Kary Mullis at the European Union of whatever kind of scientists, so they put it in Nature, because he came in there and had the audacity to tell people that it might not be that bad to have sex, that AIDS might not be something you get from sex. that I don't see any evidence for it, is all I said. I don't see any evidence for it. Why? You can't tell young people that.
Today, there are many scientists and physicians working within the conventional institutions who have similar viewpoints to those of the dissidents. Well, why don't they come out? Why don't they speak their minds? Is it possible that they take a look at what has happened when you do question the HIV equals AIDS equals death hypothesis? They've been suppressed. Dr. Peter Duesberg, noted scientist, was the main person in the line of fire.
Peter is a very scholarly person in addition to being brilliant too. He's very careful. He doesn't say anything that he can't support. And also one of the most brilliant people surely the most brilliant virologist.
My funding, for example, from the National Institute of Health will not be renewed as of this year, and I may be out of business then. Also, my colleagues have essentially excommunicated me. I'm not invited to meetings, or hardly ever to meetings anymore, not ever to one on AIDS. I'm not allowed to publish in the same journals anymore as I used to. Even as a member of the National Academy, I cannot publish in the National Academy my views that drugs may be the cause of AIDS. And I have plenty of evidence to support it, to document my claim, which might be very relevant to the health of millions of Americans and people on this planet. Yet I'm censored because I'm essentially considered to be an outcast or an odd man or somebody who has controversial views.
You know, it's just like in political scandals. Follow the money trail. Figure out who's getting paid for this.
AZT is an antiretroviral drug that became the first drug approved for the treatment of AIDS and HIV infection in 1987. It was originally intended to treat cancer, but it failed to show efficacy and had unacceptably high side effect profiles.
The antiviral drugs are chemotherapies. They're all based on chemotherapies that have been developed 30 years ago, long before AIDS was known, to kill human cells. Chemotherapy is restricted to a few months in the hope the cancer dies before you die.
If you started taking any other chemotherapeutic agent for the rest of your life, it would be that agent probably that killed you. You know, when you give chemotherapy to somebody with cancer, you give them a round of it for maybe 14 days or a few days. Hopefully you're not going to kill the patient, you're going to kill the cancer. The patient's going to survive. But you don't keep giving it to him until he dies, because he certainly will. The way to get rid of AIDS is to stop funding it. Just stop everything that's called AIDS research. Somebody tries to get a grant for AIDS research, say, we don't do it anymore. We don't have AIDS. There are no old wise men up there at the top of science, which I really did until '68. I would have thought, you know, if you try to publish a dumb paper in a journal like Nature, it won't get published. If you try to publish a good paper in there, like I later tried to publish PCR, the invention of PCR, in the same journal, and they didn't take it. So it's up there. There isn't an up there. There's no place up on the Academy of Science is just a bunch of idiots, just like everybody else. You know, the editors of journals, austere journals even, they're just busy with their little lives and stuff. There are no old wise men up on the top making sure that we don't do something really dumb.
I remember when I made the shift myself, because for the first few years of AIDS, I was reporting on this story from the conventional perspective. And then I learned, from one reason or another, I had a chance to go into it more deeply. I spent a week in the lab of a virologist in Germany who showed me the procedures that were involved in isolating and purifying viruses, showed me why he also didn't believe that this had ever been done with HIV. And gradually I understood the intricacies of this story, and that allowed me to make the shift. But I remember being resistant to thinking that I'd been reporting this wrongly all those years. It takes a lot of, you know, kind of movement inside to be able to change direction on such an important and emotive issue as the cause of AIDS.